Let me begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land I am speaking from today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people on whose land our National Parliament meets, and the traditional owners of the lands from right across the country. Now, Mr President, I hope you don't mind me saying that after announcing my resignation, I'm going to share this with the rest of the world. You sent me a cheeky text message saying that you wouldn't kick me out of the Senate during my final speech. Now, I'm not sure how you're going to do that from Melbourne, but I'm going to do my best to behave. I didn't expect that my final speech would take place in a virtual parliament from a lockdown city amid a global pandemic. It's a pandemic that's causing untold suffering and hardship across the world. It's a pandemic that follows a devastating summer of bushfires. And it's a pandemic that concludes my decade in this parliament. Over that decade, 6 different prime ministers have come and gone. Climate change remains a festering sore on our body politic. Economic inequality has been entrenched. Race politics has reared its ugly head again. And the gap with our First Nations peoples has grown. If ever there was a time for deep reflection and for a reset of our national politics, this is it. Like many people right across the country, I've had plenty of time to reflect these past few months, and I leave the Australian Parliament knowing that despite the turmoil of the past decade, our nation is a better place because of what we Greens have achieved. One of the first votes that I cast in this place was one of my proudest as we delivered the world's best climate laws. The Clean Energy Act was the result of the power sharing arrangement between the Labor Party, the Greens and Independents, and it showed what could be achieved when politicians ditch the partisanship and cooperate in the national interest. Not long after that, I was fortunate to be able to negotiate a $4 billion dental package to provide millions of children free Medicare-funded dental care. How good's this, I thought? Thanks to the Greens, we had a price on carbon, we have billions of dollars flowing into renewable energy projects. We had the first stage of our Denticare plan to roll out Medicare-funded dental care to Australians across the country. In politics, just as in life, sometimes you don't know how good things are until they're gone. That power sharing arrangement may have been tarnished by former Prime Minister's quest for vengeance, but it was one of the most productive periods in the nation's history. The Abbott government that followed is infamous for many reasons, but the jaw-dropping 2014 budget with its full frontal assault on Medicare and on schools is seared in my memory. It was like a horror story. Now, each election, millions of people vote for the Greens because they share our values, but they also vote for us to hold bad governments to account, and that was never more important than during those Abbott years. I had the great privilege of taking on the leadership of the Australian Greens just as that government ended, and I like to think that those two things may have been connected. Leadership was a responsibility that weighed very heavily on me. As leader, I confronted successive Conservative governments and spent much of my time fighting their attacks on the environment and on people doing it tough. But I'm also proud that along the way we achieved some real wins for people. Securing $100 million in funding for Landcare as part of our solution to the backpacker tax standoff was a good day. Before I was elected to Parliament, I often thought these things were the product of careful deliberation and a thorough policy process, but it was a chance meeting with the Leader of the Senate in the corridor that allowed us to achieve a great outcome for farmers and for the environment. It took a 28-hour sitting to democratise voting in the Senate after the Labor Party reversed their position and threw everything at us. The Greens policy was based on the very novel idea that in a democracy, the outcome of an election should reflect how people vote, not on backroom deals between political parties. There were lots of wonderful offerings during that long and ugly debate that night, but listening to a senator compare the bill to his colonoscopy had me questioning my life choices. After years of campaigning against multinational tax dodging, we negotiated important laws that increased penalties on corporations for tax avoidance and profit shifting. Labor attacked us because the laws didn't go far enough. But when will Labor learn that you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good? Sam Dastyari, of course, led the attack with memes and posters and even a billboard decrying Di Natale's dirty deals. Sam, of course, was an expert on the subject of dirty deals. Now, working across the political divide carries real risk for a party like ours. We didn't benefit electorally from the power-sharing government with the then Gillard government, but we got some really important policy wins. Getting good policy outcomes on the rare occasions we negotiated with the Liberals also gave our rivals plenty of ammunition, and it did cut across our own message. But I firmly believe that we owe it to the millions of people who vote for us to roll up our sleeves and deliver Greens policy for them. Leading our team in walking out of Parliament during Senator Hanson's first speech, rather than sit in quiet acceptance of her racist views, or worse still, shake her hand afterwards, is another proud moment. Within hours of doing that, our office was flooded with calls, mostly from people from the Australian Muslim community, many in tears, just thankful that they were not alone. Often during my time in Parliament, I felt like I was shouting in the wind. But in that moment, I knew that our message of solidarity was being heard where it mattered most. I'm proud to have led the party that supported marriage equality long before it was a popular cause, and worked tirelessly with campaigners from across the community for decades until it became law. Our work behind the scenes in exposing the corporate greed in our banking and financial sector was critical in helping secure a banking royal commission. When we first advocated for a levy on the big banks, the Liberals slammed us for our economy-wrecking socialist policies. A decade later, they introduced one. It gave me great satisfaction to be upstairs in the ABC studios of Parliament House doing a radio interview with Senator Patterson, freshly out of the Institute of Public Affairs and now defending another sensible Greens idea. Greens legislation for a National Integrity Commission to root out corruption was rejected outright by both sides for almost a decade, but we finally won. Now it's time to make sure that an anti-corruption watchdog is up to the job of fighting corruption and not just window dressing. Medicinal cannabis would still be illegal in Australia if it wasn't for the Greens. It took our bill to gain cross-party support and joint press conferences with people like renowned Greens hater and LNP Senator Ian McDonald for the government to finally start listening. We've been a lone voice in this place on sensible drug policy with reforms like pill testing, supervised injecting facilities and adult use cannabis. And I know there are MPs in that place who agree with us. I just wish they wouldn't find their voice only once they've left Parliament. The citizenship scandal that saw us lose 2 fine senators was one of my toughest times in that place. The first phone call from Senator Ludlam came out of the blue, and it triggered a series of events that cast a shadow over the 45th Parliament. A Perth lawyer had been digging around and he discovered that Scott had left New Zealand as a 3-year-old and had not renounced his citizenship. I initially thought the second call just days later from Senator Waters was a joke. She told me that she was still waiting for legal confirmation, but she believed that she'd unknowingly held Canadian citizenship. Well, the legal advice was clear. They were both ineligible to sit in Parliament. It's an archaic section of our Constitution. It needs to be changed, but there was no question about what to do next. In the space of a week, they'd both resigned and I'd lost my two deputy leaders. We'd let down our members and supporters. The Prime Minister called us sloppy and extraordinarily negligent. The right-wing media went into overdrive, as they do. Of course, we all know what happened in the weeks and months that followed. Politicians from all sides were outed, except this time there were delays, denials, blame, and expensive High Court challenges at the taxpayer's expense. It's one thing to talk about personal responsibility in this place, it's another thing to demonstrate it. So I leave here feeling incredibly proud of our team, who have behaved with integrity and achieved so much. I leave with a deep sense of personal fulfilment that comes from fighting for a cause bigger than yourself. But if I'm being really honest, I also leave knowing that successive parliaments in which I've served have failed to achieve lasting reforms on the things that matter. Climate change, homelessness, job insecurity, mental illness, protection of our environment. It's easy to put these flaws down to the personal failings of individual prime ministers, but the failings of the past decade are much bigger than that. The very structures that underpin our democracy, many of them established a century ago, have been incapable of responding to the challenges before us. We're currently living through a pandemic for which we were warned but unprepared. A national medical stockpile was inadequate. Health workers were unable to get masks. And we lacked the basic capacity to make our own. Victorians are now locked up in their houses because of the failure of a quarantine system that failed due to a culture of outsourcing and privatisation. Ongoing outbreaks in aged care facilities have revealed the ugly truth of how we care or don't care for the elderly. We were warned about the threat of the global pandemic, and we've been warned time and again about the threat of catastrophic climate change. Yet the Coalition, the Labor Party, the business community, and even sections of the union movement are divided over this issue, despite having the technological tools to address it, despite significant public support, despite a litany of climate-fuelled disasters. They remain incapable of reaching internal agreement. The Liberal Party once believed in protecting the environment, in the notion of conservation. Today, they're dominated by a reactionary rump that represents corporate rent seekers that want protection from technological change like renewable energy. Today, with the climate crisis spiralling out of control, Labor's climate policy is weaker than it was a decade ago. Now, the Labor Party lost me many, many years ago, but they're going to lose a lot more people if they don't muster up a bit of courage and take a stand on climate change. The Business Council worked hand in glove with the Abbott government to tear down our climate laws, only to leave their members hopelessly exposed to the risks posed by climate change. All they offer now is lip service in support of climate action, but criticism of anyone with a meaningful plan to do something about it. And during last year's election campaign, we had a powerful mining union in Queensland forcing candidates to sign a pledge in support of coal mining and denying them a chance at a long-term future. Not so long ago, our major newspapers would hold these institutions and our political parties to account. Today, they host fundraisers for them. The dominant Murdoch media continues to shamelessly promote climate denialism, and the ABC's been worn down by relentless attacks and ongoing budget cuts. Social media, which was getting started a decade ago, promised to take power away from media moguls and to democratise debate by giving citizens a voice. Instead, it's become a platform for extremes, where conspiracy theories flourish, and where anonymity plays to the worst of human instincts. Our institutions no longer reflect who we are or who we want to become. We urgently need a new era of sweeping political and economic reform. And it has to start by making our democracy work for people and not corporations. The first political fight I saw up close in this place was watching a cashed-up gambling lobby descend on Parliament House like a pack of vultures and shamelessly sink popular pokies reform. Since that time, I've seen the same story play out over and over and over again, whether it's the mining tax, alcohol regulation, or action on climate change. The formula they use is always the same. Keep the donations flowing. Deploy an army of lobbyists, preferably politicians, so they can exploit their connections. Host fundraisers. Run big campaigns against anyone who threatens your bottom line. Pay thousands to get a seat at the minister's table, and the bigger the cheque, the better the seat. That awful new fence that surrounds Parliament House now is symbolic of this rotten culture. We've closed off the building to the community, but we've thrown the gates wide open to vested interests with deep pockets. A representative democracy should represent the full diversity of its citizens. Instead, ours represents a political class who tread the well-worn path of student politics to political staffer to parliamentary politics. Our parliament and the Australian nation are two different countries. We need more women, more people from different cultural and economic backgrounds, more young people in our parliament. It shouldn't take a pandemic to force the introduction of technologies like the one we're using right now, which is going to make it easier for parents and carers, people with disabilities, people from rural backgrounds to engage in our democracy. Our parliament's not representative of how people vote either. The National Party, with about 4% of the national vote, returns 16 lower house MPs. The Greens, with almost 3 times that vote, returns 1 MP. Yet for nearly 2 decades, a tiny, overrepresented anti-climate party has been crucial in blocking action on climate change. If we had proportional representation so that our national parliament fairly represented the wishes of voters, climate change debate would be largely over. This pandemic's demonstrated the critical role of looking after people. We've got to get our democracy working for people. Pandemics also exposed the lie that government can't support those in need. For years, the low rate of Newstart condemned people to a life of poverty, and that's only changed because millions more Australians have been forced to live that reality. We now effectively have a universal income, and it should stay. We've been gradually heading towards a 2-tiered, privatised, American-style health system, but we know the best insurance against any pandemic is Medicare and our precious public health system. The crisis has again exposed a tough reality for people in insecure and inadequate housing. We need a massive new build of public housing, which would create jobs and investment. Online communication has been critical for people during this period of isolation, keeping people connected, allowing businesses to continue functioning. It's now an essential service. Free access to high-quality internet would give many more people opportunities to flourish. And real action on climate change is nation building. Phasing out dirty, expensive coal-fired power and gas and replacing it with renewable energy means thousands of new jobs. There are jobs too in building network infrastructure, new storage systems and the electrification of our transport system. I do leave Parliament, Mr President, hopeful that things will change. I do. Unlike the response to climate change, state and federal governments have ditched the partisanship and have been guided by evidence in responding to this pandemic. It's absolutely true, some terrible mistakes have been made and they deserve scrutiny. But I also want to acknowledge the many sensible, life-saving decisions too. There's also a strong sense of solidarity in the community. It's been a really, really tough year for many people. Many people are struggling. but the vast majority of people understand that this shared sacrifice is required to get us through this together. It's also a moment where people have been given space to think deeply about what's important in life. We're social creatures. We rely on human contact. We rely on each other. It's a moment like this that puts a lie to the dog-eat-dog rampant individualism that has formed the basis of our politics for far too long. I'm optimistic because social movements are building around the world too. And throughout history, it's these movements that have driven change. Right now, collective action on climate change, racism, sexism and inequality is gathering steam. I remember leaving Parliament especially demoralised after a particularly brutal sitting week, and it was the tens of thousands of passionate, engaged young people at the climate strike the following day that gave me the strength and energy to keep fighting. I want to thank them. I leave politics feeling confident about the Greens too. I joined the Victorian Greens 2 decades ago. We had no state or federal representation. And over what is a short period of time, we've elected dozens of state and federal MPs and local government councils right across the country. Our party is strong and resilient. We have the support of millions of Australians, and we're the only party with genuine solutions to today's problems. That doesn't mean we can't do better. We need to continue building a culture of accountability and respect. It's easy to focus on yourself or perform for a small and noisy crowd, but success lies in reaching outwards and engaging meaningfully with people from right across the community. And that's what our members and supporters and volunteers do every day. None of us would be here without their commitment, their passion, working tirelessly, giving their time, sharing their ideas, and talking to real people to get more Greens elected. To everyone that's knocked on doors, made calls, stood on polling booths in the middle of winter, demanded change at rallies, shown solidarity at vigils, and done so much more to make this country better, I want to thank each and every one of you. To all of my staff who have worked so hard for so long this past decade, thanks so much for the long hours, the weekends, the travel away from home, the pep talks, the wise counsel, and just for listening to me whinge. I'm not going to name anyone today, but you know who you are, and I will be forever grateful. To my team of wonderful Greens MPs, thank you for your unwavering support. You are all incredible human beings, and it has been a privilege to lead this incredible team. To Adam, you're going to do us proud. To other MPs across the political divide, I know that most of you are here because you believe in making Australia a better place. And I genuinely wish all of you every success in making the next decade better than the last. To all of the people who keep our parliament functioning, the clerks, the Senate attendants, the cleaners and the gardeners, thank you so much. To the Comcar drivers with whom I've spent many a long drive, just thanks for your company. It's been a privilege. And to my family, Lucy, thank you for your incredible support these past 10 years. I could not have done this without you, and I hope I can support you in your career just as you have done in mine as we raise 2 fine young boys. To my boys, time to get the footy boots out because your old man's back in town. To my mum and dad who have ridden every bump along the way in support of their little boy, thank you for all of your love, and thanks, Mum, for all those packages of lasagna that I managed to sneak into Parliament House. In my first speech almost a decade ago, fresh-faced and optimistic, I quoted Martin Luther King, who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Now older and greyer, after a tough decade in Parliament, my faith in that idea is a little shaken, but not broken, Sure, there have been some setbacks this past decade, but it will bend towards justice again. It will bend because we will bend it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Di Natale.